In the summer of 1924, a prospector set off into the remote wilderness of British Columbia in search of gold. But what he found was something far more extraordinary and terrifying. Carried away in the dead of night, Albert Ostman claimed he spent 6 days held captive by a family of Bigfoot. Albert Ostman had always been drawn to the wild. Born in Sweden and raised in Canada, his years as a lumberjack and prospector gave him an unparalleled sense of adventure. By the summer of 1924, the tales of a fabled lost gold mine near Toba Inlet, British Columbia, had consumed his thoughts. This mine, spoken of in hushed tones, was said to hold riches beyond imagination. With a Winchester rifle slung over his shoulder, a hunting knife strapped to his belt, and enough supplies for a week, Albert set out alone. The forest was dense and vibrant, a cathedral of towering pines and the melodic sound of a bubbling creek nearby. To Albert, it was perfect solitude, far from the noise of civilization. But in the wilderness's silence, something else lurked, waiting for its moment. The first few days of Albert's expedition passed without incident. He explored the forest methodically, searching for signs of the legendary mine. During the day, he felt an overwhelming peace, but the nights were different. By the third night, he noticed faint rustling sounds outside his tent. At first, he dismissed them as raccoons or other small animals, but as the hours crept by, the noises grew louder, closer. Items disappeared from his campsite. A tin of food, a small tool. Unease settled over him like a heavy fog. Albert couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. On the fourth night, Albert, exhausted from the day's search, collapsed into his sleeping bag and fell into a deep sleep. But a sudden jolt shattered his rest. He awoke to the sensation of being lifted. Disoriented, his first thought was that he'd been caught in a landslide, but as the grogginess faded, the horrifying reality set in. He was being carried. Trapped inside his sleeping bag, Albert was slung over something massive. The rhythmic thudding of enormous footsteps and the distant rustling of leaves were all he could hear. Panic surged through him. He struggled, but the grip on him was unyielding. For hours the creature carried him through the darkness, his mind racing with fear and confusion. Finally, he fell onto the hard ground. As he clawed his way out of the sleeping bag, the dim light of dawn revealed an otherworldly sight. A secluded valley surrounded by towering cliffs. And there, standing around him, was a family of creatures unlike anything he'd ever seen. There were 4 of them. The largest, clearly the male, stood nearly 8 feet tall. His massive frame, covered in thick, dark hair, exuded both power and intelligence. Beside him, a slightly shorter female stood, her fur a lighter shade and her demeanor watchful, almost maternal. 2 smaller figures, likely juveniles, lingered near her, their curious eyes locked on Albert. Albert's breath caught in his throat. These were no ordinary animals. The creatures moved with a sense of purpose, their grunts and gestures resembling communication. The male's piercing gaze pinned Albert in place, sending a shiver down his spine. For 6 days Albert remained in the valley, a captive of the Bigfoot family. Despite his fear, he quickly realized they had no intention of harming him. They were curious, observing him as much as he observed them. The male seemed interested in Albert's belongings, inspecting his rifle and other tools with cautious fascination. During his captivity, Albert adapted. The creatures offered him strange, sweet-tasting grass to eat, and he reluctantly accepted to maintain his strength. He noted their behaviors. The female meticulously washing and stacking leaves, the juveniles playing games that resembled wrestling matches, and the male keeping a vigilant watch over the valley. Albert marveled at their intelligence. Their gestures and vocalizations hinted at a complex social structure, but he also knew he couldn't stay. The valley, though beautiful, was a prison. Albert's mind raced with plans for escape, but the towering cliffs and the creature's watchful eyes left him with little opportunity. On the 6th day, Albert had his chance. He had noticed the male's curiosity about a small tin he kept in his pocket. His snuff, a powdered tobacco, An idea took root. That evening, he offered the male a pinch of the substance. The Bigfoot sniffed it cautiously, then eagerly consumed it. Moments later, the creature began coughing and spluttering, clearly affected by the potent tobacco. Seizing the opportunity, Albert grabbed his gear and ran. The adrenaline coursing through his veins drowned out his exhaustion. Behind him, he could hear the confused grunts of the Bigfoot, but he didn't dare look back. He navigated the forest with the skill of a seasoned woodsman, determined to put as much distance as possible between him and the valley. Hours later, disheveled and disoriented, Albert stumbled upon a logging camp. His sudden arrival caused a stir among the workers, who paused their tasks to stare at the haggard man before them. Albert's clothes were torn and caked with mud, his face pale and etched with exhaustion. The workers rushed to his aid, offering water and a place to sit as they bombarded him with questions. Initially, Albert struggled to find the words. Shaken, his thoughts a jumble of terror and relief, he calmed down. He began recounting his ordeal. The loggers listened intently, their skepticism evident in the exchanged glances and occasional chuckles. However, Albert's detailed descriptions of the creatures, their size, behaviors, and even their peculiar diet, left some of them uneasy.
"You're serious about this?"
one man asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Albert nodded solemnly.
"I've seen bears, moose, and everything in between, but nothing like those things."
Among the workers was an older foreman who'd spent decades in the forests. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable, until Albert finished. Then, with a grave tone, he said,
"There's been whispers about things out here, things folks don't talk about. Maybe what you saw ain't as crazy as it sounds."
This subtle acknowledgement lent Albert's tale a weight that hung over the camp. Though some remained skeptical, others eyed the surrounding woods with newfound wariness. The foreman offered Albert a place to rest, urging him to recover before attempting to return to civilization. The next morning, Albert set out with a small group of loggers who escorted him to the nearest town. Along the way, they questioned him further, pressing for every detail. By the time Albert reached safety, his story spread whispered from one camp to the next. Albert Ostman's story remains one of the most detailed accounts of a Bigfoot encounter. Whether you believe his tale or dismiss it as fantasy, it has become a cornerstone of Bigfoot lore, a testament to the enduring mystery of the wilderness. The dense forests of British Columbia continue to hold secrets, and Albert's account serves as a reminder of the unknowns that still linger in the wild places of the world. Watch these videos next.